In reality, was it just an insignificant publishing company they adhered to? I learned years later that this was something of a tradition among Jehovah's Witnesses. Shahan was apparently still writing to the Strohbachs, but I was told nothing other than that he has sent yet another letter thanking them for looking after me. I strongly believe that he, or some other witnesses, having seen my mother reading coffee grounds and tea leaves, had been condemning her with witchcraft for a very long time. Indeed, as I have already spoken about, my mother was doing it just for the fun, although some of the things she predicted came true, but she was not doing anything evil. People loved listening to her, and as I said before, it was a traditional pastime. Understandably, there were certain things my mother could not tell people, but speaking of things as if seeing them in their cups often helped them. Black art, on the other hand, was never her interest, and she never wanted to see anybody get hurt, as was understood by forever judgmental folk. She preferred to help others whenever there was need, even if it meant giving away her last piece of bread so that others could survive. I was extremely saddened about this Jehovah's Witness fanaticism and superstition. I have never seen anything sent to me out of my mother's concern and love, but believe they could have been very useful. I felt, without prejudice, that what the Strohbachs have done due to their misguided and ungrounded condemnations and faith was the true evil, and not what my mother had sent me. I have therefore written to my mother telling her that those much appreciated gifts were damaged in the post, without saying what had really happened. Perhaps one needed to wait until we met one day. I hoped this diplomacy could help the situation. Being a very forgiving person, I considered it all as if not having existed, trying to forget. But the pain I was inflicted with by that cultist behavior was, and still is, unforgettable. Through their so-called unshakable faith, they declared that we should always imitate Christ-like qualities, one of which was never to judge others. What, then, should we call what they condemned my mother with, allegedly conducting devil worship without being so? In truth, my parents have never been religious. The closest observation would reveal them to be more down-to-earth atheists. It was their choice, and nobody had the right to judge them as wrongdoers. When I read what Mark Twain had written, I took his advice seriously. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than the ones you did so. So, throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. I was certainly discovering things. Before I was introduced to Magdalene, I often visited the cities of Ulm, Frankfurt am Main, and Liechtenstein, sometimes with the Strohbachs. I found almost all European cities interesting, for they were rich in color and eventful history. Visiting those places had been like traveling back in time. Rothenburg ob der Tauber, for example, was like a fairyland, preserved wonderfully just as it was centuries ago. I still wonder why Siegfried wanted me to start a relationship with Sibyl there. Was it to make it truly memorable for us? Was this truly their desire to see Sibyl and me happy? Was it perhaps to camouflage a very serious situation between her and Siegfried, as I mentioned before? I might have been wrong thinking this way, but certain expressions observed painted an unfortunate image. I could only guess, but could not be absolutely sure. I was never to question what I observed, not making any remarks, only hoping that things would become clearer. I wondered what Ruth knew about this. Maybe she simply ignored it, or it did not worry her. When I spent some time in Paris during the holidays, I knew I was back home, while feeling somewhat saddened and even lost for brief moments in time, never wanting to leave. However, I was currently living in Germany, believing that there was some form of permanency, but things proved to be a little different. I cannot forget the times when I took long walks in the streets of this great city at night, visiting the Louvre, arcades, coffee shops, and listening to the street musicians. Some played their guitars, and others sang. I frequented wonderful spots and spoke to very friendly French. I certainly surprised a number of people with my caricature drawings. When visiting Normandy for a summer camping holiday, the weather was delightful, and Saint-Malo and Saint-Michel were divine. During this time, I was befriended with another girl, and spent a lovely time with her. Long after this meeting, we often wrote to each other in French. Interestingly, those letters were not confiscated. Such mini-holidays were important as they took one's mind off the normal, everyday concerns of life. Interestingly also, whenever one visited Paris, one always felt as if it was for the first time, because there were so many things to be discovered, always something else to enjoy. Paris still remains my real home. In fact, I could visit this city every weekend, whenever I wanted. Frequenting Switzerland and climbing the Alps was also one of my favorite holiday activities. My adventures often took place at Jungfrau, as I used to love mountain climbing and skiing. When I was introduced to Magda, and an interesting love affair started between us, I was unsure how things would develop. Would she also enjoy what I enjoyed doing? However, when we considered marriage, I felt a little apprehensive and unsure. My relationship with her was very unusual, but exciting nevertheless. In regard to Sibyl, her parents' abusive nature towards her was neither humanly desirable nor ethical. Here I am repeating myself for a specific reason. Remember, Sibyl's parents took the biblical texts, as interpreted by the witnesses, too seriously and fanatically, abusing her without realizing, believing that they were pleasing Jehovah. Her attempting to read women's magazines or looking into a television guide was also taken as permissible in their fanaticism. She was encouraged only to read Jehovah's Witness publications and concentrate only on the Lord's ways. One could understand how she must have felt. Unfortunately, I started seeing similar trends with Magda, but hoped she was a little more intelligent and able to control her fanaticism. With the supposed help of her parents, Sybil's condition worsened, and as a result suffered from multiple personality complexes. In the end, she committed suicide. For the witnesses, it was just one of these things. However, a few of them might have sensed the strictly Bible-based control of her parents, who never considered medical science as important. I suppose they were praying to their God, Jehovah, to help her day and night, but nothing happened, and their faith eventually led to Sybil's horrific end. If I would have started a relationship with her, much to Siegfried's delight, things would not be any better for her, and I would be sucked into a situation I never wanted to be in. I only hoped I have not been blamed for such a tragedy, for I did not contribute to it. These were memories I did not want to have, and yet they still haunt me, but at least without the hurt. I suppose time heals. However, when considering how things developed between Magda and me, I could not help but feel extremely worried about the possibility of blind adherence to the mind-dulling dictations of a fanatical group of people she adored. Because I had seen the results of cultist extremism and what it actually did to people. On the other hand, whenever I think about how Samuel had been laughing at me saying to his work colleagues, just as I remember, if he, meaning me, would have come here a few years ago, he'd really be useful within the underground bunkers amongst the low-grade trash, enslaved for the Luftwaffe, and building bombs for our Führer. It felt like the icing on the cake. Although I kept quiet for the sake of peace, I nevertheless got hurt. Before the Strohbachs left for Australia, and I had to organize different accommodation at Sister Nurk's, for a short while I felt somehow abandoned and alone. Long before my relationship was strongly developed with Magda, I met an English girl, Dorothy, in Stuttgart, who was studying in Munich and was soon to return to London. Spending time with her helped me to get to know a little more about the English. She was pretty and very bubbly, and invited me to go to London during the holidays. And I thought I could take the opportunity to do so before my studies continued in earnest. I decided to fly over to London, and because I had some savings from my earnings, I was sure I could accommodate myself as well as doing some shopping and discovering life there. I was advised that one could stay for up to 6 months as a tourist, but in fact, just a few weeks would be sufficient for my first visit. After having transferred my belongings to Sister Nurk's, I packed only what I needed for my immediate necessities, took my camera, and flew to London. When close to Heathrow, we did a round tour over the city before landing. I was extremely excited about this interlude. I was going to practice my English language skills, going to ride the double-decker buses and taste English cuisine, hopefully with the assistance of Dorothy. Although I had not made any prior booking, I believed it would not present a problem in finding accommodation, even if I did not meet her, but was soon to discover the contrary. She was somewhere else with her parents. On arrival, I asked the bus driver to drop me somewhere really famous and centrally located in London, which he did. I was in Trafalgar Square. At first I observed people going about their business, school children, walking in groups, and lots of cars. I spent some time in the restaurants and enjoyed hot drinks. Remember, this was my very first time in London. I walked long distances, roads which appeared to be unending, looked in shop windows, visited department stores, and finally arrived at Buckingham Palace. I admired the guards and stopped by one of the seats, gazing at this magnificent architecture. There were a number of school children within the confines of this marvel, and thought I could discover a little more about this palace. I asked one of the guards where I could find information about this exquisite edifice. I later learned that he was a guide and asked if I had a special invitation, so that he could admit me, and made a few phone calls on my behalf, and told me that if I wanted to meet other people, he could introduce me to them. One of them was his young son and family. I could apparently stay with them a little while, probably until the following day. That would be interesting, but when he told me he sensed something different about me, I began to feel worried. I wondered what I had got myself into. Then his friend, Detective Sergeant Steve, if my memory is correct, arrived, and I had a pleasant talk with everyone. I wondered whether this was the only experience I was to have, and then be turned back. That would be fine also. However, he received a call from within this magnificent building, told me excitedly that there was a young gentleman who would like to meet me, and was on his way. As I was here for the first time, I was surprised and wondered what made them show such an interest in me. After all, I was only a tourist. Was it by any chance a wrong identity? He said that I was a very lucky young man, as this kind of thing would normally not happen. I was unsure if I needed to believe in miracles, which my mother used to talk about. I became very curious about who that young person might be. Remember, I was only fascinated with this magnificent architecture, and nothing else. Soon after, an interesting-looking limo arrived, with a uniformed driver, and a young gentleman I was told about. My new friends and the young man exchanged a few words, but the guide and detective were extremely courteous towards him. I thought that he must be of a very important background, and conducted myself likewise. I was certainly discovering much about the English in such a short period of time. When he met me, he presented a face of great joy, but at the same time behaved extremely noble. I had a feeling about who he might be, but when he introduced himself, I wondered why it had to be me, a simple tourist and young person wanting to know a little more about this wonderful edifice. He said he would show me around, and was going to introduce me as one of his school friends to his family. This way, I would have a chance to learn about the building. I courteously thanked him for his invitation, and told him I was simply a commoner visiting London for the very first time. This is when he said he felt something very special about me, and asked if I could perhaps draw portraits of people.